Hi, guys. How are you doing?
Have we resolved the tech issues?
Yes.
Oh,
we're
here
just
we
gonna
are.
go
Are we
with
good?
it.
Hello.
Do we? I can hear me.
Okay.
I can hear me. We are good. I am so excited to not be interviewing someone tonight and to not be moderating a conversation tonight.
You're
So I am
welcome.
just here for the party.
Especially as we did interview someone earlier today. We just have to tell you, this is not a part of the program. Stephanie, who did we interview today?
We interviewed Clive Owen, who plays a Hasidic Jew in an upcoming movie called The Song of Names. And it's really hard to interview Clive Owen in person. We'll let you ask a question at some point. It's really hard to interview Clive Owen in person because he is so unbelievably beautiful. And like the sun was hitting his eyes, and I was like, are his eyes two different colors? I don't even know what we talked about.
I think we should have sent that picture of him to Judy so she'd include it in her amazing
You know,
slideshow.
sometimes you see movie stars and then you see them in real life. You're like, I get why they sort of made you attractive in editing, but you walk into a room and this man wearing like a linen shirt just like looks at you, and my wife is here, and I hope she's not offended. But if he said, come away with me, I would have considered it. It's a ridiculously good-looking man.
Yeah, I feel like everything's just like different now.
You were as quiet during this interview as I've ever seen you. You were like, so Clive,
Well, it was like hot in the room, and there were like beads of sweat on his forehead, and I was like, he's so tan. I wonder if he's wearing makeup, but why would he be wearing makeup? Because it's a suppressed day. I don't think he's on TV.
Coming soon to an unorthodox podcast by
well,
you.
this is for a movie in which he plays a Hasidic man who spends like half of the movie sort of like grumbling and gruffing and like looking at his beard the whole time. So it's a change
Anyway,
of pace.
where were we? Where are we? Just kidding.
Well, I'm glad you guys have both had such a wonderful day. I myself am currently cutting class, so you know where my priorities stand. We asked this before, but I just want to know how many of you listen to Unorthodox? So really, most of you, but for those of you who don't, would you two give us the backstory? How did the podcast start? What's led you here?
Hi, Monique. The first thing is, for those of you who might not know what a podcast is, it's basically radio on the internet. It's on-demand audio that you can listen to at any point. And before the night is over, you will all have been subscribed to our podcast, because we will have you take out your phones and we will show you how to subscribe. That is sort of our ulterior motive in being here. Liel and I work at Tablet Magazine, and a colleague of ours, Mark Oppenheimer, about 4 years ago, came up to us and said, everyone's doing podcasts. They were this like really big deal. I think something big is coming in the podcast arena. And so he said, I think we should make a podcast. We have these weekly story meetings, and we talk about all sorts of things, the news, culture, funny things, serious things. And he said, I think other Jews might be having these same conversations, or at least they might want to listen to them.
And it was Friday at like 3:30 p.m., so just before Shabbos, and I was on the phone. I was like, oh yeah, no, that's a great idea, Mark. Everyone would want to listen to a Jew of the week and a Gentile of the week. What a terrific idea! Oh yeah, no, totally, I'm totally into it. Then I hang up the phone and I call Stephanie. I was like, how do we get out of this? Like, what a dumb idea, but like he's kind of our friend and we have to work with him and don't want to hurt his little feelings.
Isn't it the worst when Mark is right?
It's still 4 years later, kind of twist something when I have to admit, but I think his insight was absolutely correct, because our kind of misunderstanding was that no one cares, that this conversation would not interest anyone, which is why if you go back and listen to episode Uno, which I do not recommend, having done it myself, it's silly. It's us talking about, what were you talking about? Adam Sandler or something?
Whether Andy Samberg had what it takes to be the next Adam Sandler. Just
So
like the really hard-hitting
cutting-
stuff.
right.
Also, the legal battle between Jay Date and Jay Swipe. One was suing the other over who had the trademark to the J. I think we all do collectively, I will say. But then one ended up acquiring the other one. They bought it. So I think like everything, it was happily ever after for them.
And so the idea really was that, at least my plan, was that we'll do 3 months of this, and then I'll take Mark out for coffee, and I'll say, listen, buddy, I love you, but we tried your way. It was a disaster. Can we please not do this ever again? But then something kind of amazing started happening, which is not only did people listen, but people seem to be engaged in trying to make this a better show and trying to direct us into the places that we really very quickly realized we needed to get to, which is an exploration of all these amazing ways in which American Jewish life is lived right now, which is so much more incredibly diverse
Than Adam Sandler versus Andy Samberg.
or frankly than our own, this is our favorite word and I think our favorite entry in the book, our own little Ashken normative sensibility. Do you know Ashken normative? It's the feeling that all of Jewish life revolves around kind of Ashkenazi cultures and traditions. And so we really
and that
opened
all
up.
Jews just eat like kugel and kreplach and all like the beige K words, which actually is not the case. There are Jews from all sorts of places. And so I almost was going to apologize for interrupting you, but I don't know why I would apologize for that. But basically,
Right now? Why?
you know,
As interrupting has its own
its
entry.
own entry. It's a really important part of Jewish culture. But, you know, something that we heard from listeners was they pushed us to reflect their diversity. They pushed us to reflect the fact that Jewish life in 20 whatever year this was at the time looks different than it did a century ago, half a century ago, a generation ago. There were so many interesting ways in which Jewish life was being lived. You know, there was like modern Yiddish theater. There were farms that were incorporating Jewish agricultural practices. There was all sorts of interesting ways in which people were exploring and living their Jewish lives. And they said, we want to see more of that. And so the biggest thing we did in response was, and one of our favorite things is our conversion episode. So each year around Shavuos, which I say the Ashken normative way, because that's how Grandpa Al says it.
Plus, it sounds way cooler than Shavuot.
Shavuot is hard for me because you have to go hard on the ah. Shavuot. Like you have to know going in that that's where you're emphasizing.
And Shavuos rhymes with St. Louis, as a famous song once put it.
I'm glad you're repping St. Louis.
So basically, you know, yes, we'll be there December 19th. Save the date. So basically, what we started doing was, you know, expanding how we looked at Jewish life. For one Sukkot episode, we did a show dedicated to Jews and farming, where I actually went to Petaluma, California, to investigate this sort of like now defunct Yiddish socialist chicken farming utopia, where everyone actually fought so much that it kind of doesn't exist anymore. But it was beautiful. So basically, you know,
It really was a shocker to me that the Yiddish socialist utopian chicken farm
there
would
were the
collapse.
socialists and then the communists. I mean, it was a lot of drama. But, you know, what we realized really quickly was that people actually did want to hear these conversations. So Liel and I were wrong. It happens rarely, but, you know, occasionally. And that people wanted deeper conversations. They didn't want just jokes and, like, lightness, which we still give them on occasion, but they wanted us to be probing the real issues that are facing Jews today.
I want to talk about some of those successes and some of the surprises that have come along. But before we do that, are there any places where you felt maybe you took a wrong turn? Anything you would have done differently if you were starting all over again?
That is a good question. You are a good moderator.
Thanks.
I'm not surprised at all.
If only there was a podcast where you could, you know, ask people questions.
You know, there's these three hosts that keep doing all the talking. They don't let me come on and share my own thoughts.
Could you imagine, by the way, like doing production meetings with us? You can't get a word in edgewise. So sorry. But things we could have done differently, that's a good question.
I'll take a first stab. I said this on the air, so I feel happy to do it. So in the very beginning, about probably, I don't know, 9 or 10 episodes in, we had a person on from a certain political organization that does not reflect my own views. And if you listen to the show, you know my own views. And if you don't, I'm a big dude with a beard who looks kind of angry, so now you know my views. And so this
Ardent
person,
socialist.
right, chicken farmer utopian. And so this person from this really hardcore left-wing organization, and I'm not talking like, you know, middle of the road left-wing organization. I'm talking all the way like past the last exit on the highway left organization, comes on the show. And I'm giddy, because in my mind, I'm going to do like some kind of Sean Hannity meets Rachel Maddow meets, you know, Walter Cronkite.
Wow,
kind of like
goals.
I will sort of ask all these questions and I will just blow out of the water with my kind of, you know, combat style. And I asked all these questions, and then I listened to the show and I sounded like such an asshole. Like, why would you have a person on your show and treat them so poorly, even if you don't agree with them? And so I think it took a very long time, but I don't know how many of you listened to an episode that we did 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, in which, again, Mark being right, which kills me. But Mark said, you know what, we need to kind of atone for that. We need to have a conversation in which you try to kind of mirror how to have a conversation with someone you don't agree with. So we invited Jay Michelson on, who is a rabbi and a scholar and, this really, really, really smart writer who agrees with me on precisely this much. And we talked for 2 hours. And when the interview was all over, I looked at Stephanie and Joshua were in the room too, and I said, I think we need to run this completely unedited, because I think what we have just done is actually finally kind of crack the code of how to have a respectful conversation with someone who thinks the opposite of you without wanting to kill them, without wanting to kind of swat at them, but also without pandering to them, to have actually, linger and respect the disagreements, which really is what community is all about. I mean, the definition of community, as far as I'm concerned, is like being stuck with people you want to kill, but can't, because they're your brothers and sisters. And so I think we learned how to do it, but it took 4 years.
I have no regrets, and I've done nothing wrong.
Obviously.
Next
Except
question.
for not spoken enough in the beginning, but
That's true. That's true.
You made up
I
for it.
definitely didn't talk at the beginning of the show because I had these 2 older co-hosts. They had both written books. They seemed really smart, and I was like, I'm 20, whatever. I must not know as much as they did. It turns out I was wrong. They don't actually know that much.
No. Very
saying
little.
less about myself and more about them. But it took about, I would say, a year for me to get to a place where I was speaking as much as they were, and now it's had an amazing effect on my life, which is that I'm much more assertive. I'm in my professional, and to some people, to dismay in my personal life, but there are, hi Ben Cohen, there are ways in which I've learned a lot of, it's like professional development, right? But it's on the air for people to listen to. And, after pretty much every live show, a young woman comes up to me and says, I'm so happy when I hear you stand up to those guys. I'm so happy that you sort of speak your mind and you push back on them if they're saying something that they might not realize is a little bit whatever. And so to me, that actually is quite meaningful. If I'm hopefully modeling something that someone else hears and is like, oh, maybe I should do that more. Maybe at work I should speak up more.
Absolutely. I know that whenever I have to make a decision, I say, what would Stephanie do? And it's not led me wrong yet.
Well, the answer tonight is blue mascara, and I feel very strongly
I thought it was
about
our matching velvet shirts.
No, but for you.
I
Yeah,
mean,
we're
look,
also wearing matching velvet shirts.
You boast about young women coming up to you after live shows, but in our DC live show, a person comes up to me, unbelievable. This is one of the kind of highlights of my career, and gives me a jar with liquid in it. And I ask, what's that? And he's like, it's moonshine. I made it. And I say, oh, thanks. And he says, but don't take it on a train or nothing because it's flammable. I feel like you know me. You really, really know me.
I get a lot of cat toys, which I appreciate, on the road.
We hear people call into our listener line, send us emails, come up to us at events like this, and tell us what an impact the 3 of you have had on their lives, really for major decisions. The amount of people who have converted to Judaism after listening to this show, or who have decided to become part of their Jewish community, have decided to adopt some sort of meaningful Jewish practice. What is the magic sauce? How have you 3 managed to reach these, the Pew Report nuns, those who don't want to associate with Jewish life? As a Jewish professional, I'd really like to know, what is the magic?
I'd like to take a...
By the way, when you said nuns, I was like, the Pew Report nuns who are talking about Judaism?
You've
There
had
are.
nuns
The
on the show.
NONES.
We've had multiple
We
nuns
have
on the
had
show.
nuns.
That's true.
And some of them are Jewish. So here is kind of like my way into this answer. So when we started the show, we noticed after a while that a bunch of our listeners, and right now I'll put the number at about a quarter, right, are Jews by choice. And the first time someone wrote a letter saying, I am converting to Judaism, I think it was either me or Stephanie, someone said on the air, kind of like without thinking about it, welcome home. Which to me sounded like the most natural, normal human response you could offer to a person who has made that significant choice. And then we started getting all these letters saying, you have no idea how much that meant to us because we don't hear it outside. And I said, really? Not everyone is that? And what we realized, and this is a little bit of a bittersweet recognition, really, I think that the success of this podcast is really delightful to me, but in many ways, it also speaks of the challenges, I don't want to say the failures, of the organized Jewish community, because the fact that all these institutions that for the most part were erected 100-some years ago have failed to adapt to the needs of an ever-growing, ever-changing, ever-diverse community speaks volumes. And I think if you ask what the secret sauce is, I actually think it's very, very, very simple. I think the secret sauce is joy, and it's pride. You know, it's the fact that none of us really could think about anything else in our lives that we're more proud or excited or thrilled to explore and embody than being Jewish. And I think in so many environments that you go to today, the first thing you encounter is problems. Like, we need to talk about continuity. We need to talk about intermarriage. We need to talk about Israel and Palestine. It's like, guys, slow down. Like, there's bagels and, you know, Torah and awesomeness all around you. There are 1,000 entries in this book. There are 1,000 paths into being Jewish. Let's rejoice in them first before we get to the problem.
I think your next book is Bagels, Torah, and Awesomeness.
Yes.
I'd read it.
It's my Instagram
That
account.
is the secret sauce. I mean, it sort of goes back to what we were saying before, which was that we sort of took this on a bit of a lark, thinking that it would be something fun for people to listen to. What has actually happened, and you know, there are a variety of reasons why. I think the three of us is some of it, but I agree with Liel. I think a lot of it is that people aren't finding this elsewhere. But the fact that this is actually, you know, the one Jewish thing people do. They write in, they say, you know, I don't even go to synagogue on the high holidays, or I have no Jewish community where I live, but I listen to your podcast every week. I put my earpod 2s in and I turn this on and I'm connected. I'm transported to a place, or people who leave New York are like, I feel like I'm back in New York. But, you know, that
Because
to
you
us,
interrupt each other all the time.
By the way, I went to the doctor the other day and she said, oh, where are you from? Are you from New York? And I was like, yeah, Long Island. And she's like, I could tell because you talk really fast.
I once went to, I was in Paris, and I was not wearing, you know, a snood, and I was wearing jeans and a leather jacket, and I go over to the concierge, and I said, I want to go to this place and this place and this place. Can I walk there, or do I need to take the metro? And he goes, oh, well, you're a New Yorker, so you can walk anywhere. I was like, oh, okay. He can tell I was a New Yorker. Great. And then I go, and we're looking for somewhere to eat. And he goes, all the kosher restaurants are here. I'm like, wow, I guess you're good at your job.
That is amazing. We should hire
Got a
him.
little
Racially
nervous.
profiling.
You know, it is amazing. It also adds, you know, a bit of a responsibility for us, right? Like, if we are people's one avenue into Judaism, that means we can't mess it up, right? Like, obviously we mess things up all the time. We get things wrong and we get corrected, but there is a sense of mission to what we're doing that I don't think we had at the beginning. We kind of thought it would just be fun and light, and it's actually made us have to rise to the challenge, right? Like, if all you are listening to is us, then we want to be providing something that's important to you, and we want it to be meaningful to you.
And also, we never want this to be the last stop, because as great as the show will ever get, it will never replace, you know, a real kind of engagement. And I think the last year has really made this very evident. You know, we were stunned, like I think everyone in this room, waking up one Saturday morning a year and a couple of days ago, and learning about the first mass shooting in a synagogue in American history. We got in my car and drove down the very next morning simply because we didn't know what else to do. I'm from Israel, where we have a protocol what to do in case of these attacks. No one knows what to do in Pittsburgh. And so we went down there and we recorded an episode, which I do recommend listening to, because it just basically captures voices of the community in that moment. But reflecting on that day, and reflecting on the year that we've had, and on the ways so many of us feel like things changed, right? Like anti-Semitism got just a little bit more pronounced, like fear just got a little bit more real. I think there's only one way to go about it wrongly. The way is to kind of let anti-Semitism define you. If you spend all of your emotional, mental energy kind of, you know, grappling with and obsessing over the fear and the hurt, then they win, right? And here's how you do it right. You do it right by engaging with anything Jewish, and we really don't care. I mean, we're so different, the three of us. We really don't care if it's studying Talmud, or if it's reading Agnon, or if it's buying a great cookbook like the 100 Great Jewish Foods that we put out, and engaging with that, or learning Hebrew. Anything that brings you closer to this amazing tradition, anything that lets you reclaim a corner of it and find some joy and meaning is what you should do.
But the interesting thing that happened, I would say, within the past, I mean, it's the past few years, but more specifically post-Pittsburgh, is that people, we had been hearing from people who felt, I'm not Jewish enough. I don't know every single thing there is to know. I don't necessarily, want to go to Shabbat, but they'll write in and say, I don't want to go to synagogue, right? But I want to do something for Shabbat. So they'll write in and say, how do I do that? How do I figure out how I want to live my life? And the questions we were getting, we were realizing people actually didn't have a place to ask those questions. They were being posed in our Facebook group. They were coming into our inbox, and we're thinking, if we're the people that these listeners are coming to, we need to be a better resource. And so that sort of is where, I'm assuming, there's no more picture of the book, but that is where the idea of the book came in, because all of a sudden people who were already feeling insecure about their own Jewishness suddenly felt insecure more broadly about what it means to be Jewish in America. And now that there was an actual threat in some ways, this double whammy was really, really, I think, profoundly felt by a lot of people. So we were like, okay, how do we sort of give people something that will make them feel, that can help with the first part, right? There's not much we can do about the second, but how can we make people feel more secure in what they know about Judaism and allow them these entry points to learn a little more without feeling like they're going to be judged, or they're going to sing the wrong melody, or they're not going to know the words, or something like that?
And because there's no money on the internet, we chose to go with print.
The true origin story. So let's talk about this gorgeous book right here, the Newish Jewish Encyclopedia. Bless you.
Bless you.
I imagine that writing a tome like this involves thousands of decisions, and the three of you, as you said, are very different people. Can you talk about the process of writing this book, what made it, what didn't, and what you were hoping people would get out of it, sort of by audience?
So let's definitely talk about what people are getting out of it. I'll talk a little bit about the process, because it was like one of the greatest sources of joy of my life. Because a book like this is a never-ending argument, which is what we do when the mics are off and no one's listening. That's a conversation. So the first kind of major decision to have was criteria, right? What makes the cut? What's in and what's out? And when you think that you're writing the first Jewish encyclopedia in 40-odd years, the last known attempt was the Jewish Catalog, which is an amazing, amazing book, but a lot has changed since. We kind of thought, okay, well, for example, Stephanie really wanted to include
Broad City, a seminal television show. But here was the argument. So look, Joan Rivers is going in this book. Barbara Streisand is going in this book.
Mark
the
and I were like,
classics.
Sid Caesar.
And that the religious stuff is going to be there. But my argument was to make it a little bit more contemporary, so that this book does not feel like nothing has changed since the 1980s.
Right.
But there was a debate about, is Broad City going to be important in 5 years? So what we actually did was, we had a lot of creative solves for this. So the entry is Alana and Abby. So Alana Glazer and Abby Jacobson. And so the idea is that these are actually two really important Jewish female comedians today. And what they're doing is not groundbreaking necessarily, but right now super visible and important.
And then there was other layer of conversation that was actually way more difficult, which is, how do you handle the kind of really big questions that people are going to read with a fine-tooth comb? For example, Zionism. So I took the first stab at a Zionism entry, and again, as a gentleman of certain convictions, it took 3.5 minutes, and I was very pleased with myself. Then I put it aside and read it 2 seconds later and realized that anyone who doesn't agree with me completely is going to look at this and feel like it was like emailed by Bibi Netanyahu, and they want nothing to do with this book.
He's having a good day,
He's having a great day, yeah. And so we wrote it, and then rewrote it, and then wrote it again a third and fourth time to get to the point in which we felt it was both factually accurate, historically true, emotionally and intellectually relevant, but also contain multitudes and let enough people grapple with it because we really understood that every single one of these entries was an invitation to an argument, which, as far as we're concerned, on the heels of that other Jewish book that you should read, the Talmud, is kind of the way to do it. And then finally was the fact that we realized very, very early on that we had to grapple with the fact that we are going to miss incredibly big and incredibly embarrassing people and entries in this book, and that this book is going to be published, and then someone's be like, I can't believe you didn't include so-and-so. It's probably because you hate insert name of, racial, ethnic, minority group here. And we kind of welcome it with love, because we realize that's kind of how culture ought to work, right? We are going to neglect something. Someone is going to say, hey, what about that person? We're going to say, oh, of course, that's a great opportunity to talk about X, Y, Z. And that's how this cycle operates.
And the interesting thing, I think Zionism is actually a somewhat specific, extreme example, but a lot of people don't know what Zionism is. A lot of people might think it's a bad word that you shouldn't say, and you hear it on the internet. It actually is important to say, Zionism is the belief in the Jewish right to self-determination in the homeland. You have to say that because a lot of people actually don't know that. And so we wanted to not, I don't care what people think, I don't care what political points, feelings you come away with, but you should actually know what something like that means and learn a little bit about it and then decide what you think. And so, so many people in the past year have said to me, can you explain BDS to me? Because people are talking about it. I have no idea. I don't know what to read. I don't know what to think. And I don't know how to engage in an argument because, honestly, I don't really care, right? I don't regularly want to talk about Israel. And so now people do feel like they have to have the talking points. And so it does feel like it's important to define some, there's an entry on the Green Line. I mean, there's also fun and non-Israel stuff in this book, but there was a level of somewhat basic educational value we wanted to provide with this.
Are there any entries where you take an unequivocal stance? This is the worst thing or the very best thing?
Well, I will say that the entry for Foreskin just reads, how would we know? Which feels pretty unequivocal.
It reminds me of my first time that I ever spoke to you guys on stage, if you recall, when you called me up to talk about circumcision.
Because you had just come, this was before you worked with us, you had just come, it was your first outing after you had your son, Roey, whose birthday is today.
He's 3. Happy
Mazel
birthday.
tov.
So here I am, but my son is turning 3 today.
Not only is Sarah missing class, she's missing her son's birthday. So that is
I
how
love
committed she is.
It's in her contract, though, so don't worry about it.
That's why you pay me the big bucks. You guys have been on a whirlwind tour between live shows and book tours. You've been all around the country. Last night you were in Fran Drescher, Pennsylvania. Liel, as our listeners know, you're not from this country, and most of your experiences have been in
Maze not from this country.
What have you learned about Jewish life outside of New York? What can we learn about Jewish life outside of New York?
So when I say the thing I'm about to say elsewhere, Stephanie accuses me of pandering. So I'm going to say it here so that people know that it's real. I'm going to say that Jewish life happens outside New York. I'm sorry. You heard me.
Proof.
We have Russ and Daughters. We have so many
we have a
choices.
Russ and Daughters exhibit right behind you.
We have so many riches here. We have so many choices. We have so many resources that I feel here so often some of us have gotten really kind of blasé about it. It's like, oh, of course, everything is available. It's at the tip of our hands. Judaism is something that, just happens to us. It happens almost by osmosis. And then you travel with this kind of completely Manhattan-centric approach that you're at the very center of life. And you visit these amazing communities in Detroit and Denver and Cincinnati, where we were this Sunday, and Houston. And you see people doing incredibly creative things and doing them because they're together, there are not a lot of them, and they're eager to make this thing work and thrive. And I really couldn't be more inspired. And I think that any conversation about the future of American Judaism has to begin by acknowledging that this is not a New York and LA bi-coastal centric culture at all anymore, if it ever was.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's really amazing to get to meet all of these communities and to go to an event where some people have never listened to a podcast and some people have listened to every single episode of Unorthodox and have very specific thoughts about all of us, which we love to hear. I mean, I think Liel is right. There is something really valuable in stepping out. You know, I grew up on Long Island. It felt like every single person I know was Jewish, so that osmosis thing definitely is
I grew up in
real.
Israel. It felt the same way.
But, you know, we had a guest in Cincinnati, and he said, you know, he was from LA, and he's like, yeah, in LA, you drive by 6 synagogues on one side of the road and 6 on the other side, and there's all these different ones. And he's like, and then I moved to Cincinnati, and I realized, oh, if I want to be part of this Jewish community, I need to get involved. And so he is now quite involved. He is on the board of his synagogue. He's doing all these things that he's a guest on a Jewish podcast. He is doing all these things that he probably wouldn't have to do if he was in LA. And you notice that when you go from place to place. Like, we've done shows in LA, and everyone's like, of course you're in LA. Like, of course you've come to LA. And, you know, people show up, and it's nice. But when you go to Cleveland, people are really happy to see you. And it shows that actually it is nice to go to those places and feel like it's basically a way of showing that, yes, we acknowledge that you exist and that you are here, and we want you to be part of the conversation.
We're going to move soon to audience questions, but before we do that, you've been speaking about this book a lot. You guys wrote the book, but I'm curious to know how well you actually know your own book.
Is this a test?
Yes, I'm going to test you. I'm going to
Oh, Lord.
read some excerpts.
I am
from
not nearly drunk
entries
enough
Okay.
for
and
this.
see if you can figure out where they're from.
I'm just going to scheme Gal Gadot for every entry.
You
That's
might
what
be
I'm
right
going to do.
eventually. The first one is, it can also be chosen after 3 Gold Star beers on Birthright Israel.
Gal Gadot.
Oh, wait.
Arak.
It can also.
It could also be chosen after 3 Gold Star beers on Birthright Israel.
Is it Aliyah? Aliyah?
Your Hebrew name.
My fun, parlor trick is I can tell you who wrote most of the entries, but
So can I
I
just
can't
learn.
Okay, again. Okay, we're 0 for 1.
The most important human ever to grow up in Milwaukee.
Golda Meir. That's part of her entry. There's other stuff about her, too.
That's it. You're unequivocal. She is the best person from
And I
Milwaukee.
said that, actually read that last night, and someone was like, no. And I was like, oh, who would you nominate? He's like, my wife. She's from Milwaukee.
Oh, that's so sweet.
I was like, okay, I was in the next edition. We'll definitely scribble that in the margins.
Like season 1 of your favorite TV show, it starts with a big bang and picks up the pace as it moves along.
Genesis?
Exodus.
Exodus is like your favorite sequel. Number 2.
Did I just get that right?
You did. Torah scholar. Okay, I'm gonna.
See, Stephanie actually read this book.
I prepare.
I also
I liked this one in particular. It became known in some circles as Occupied Scarsdale.
that what's it called? Why am I blanking? Efrat.
I do have family in Efrat.
Guys, you like that. That was niche.
I enjoyed it. As someone from Scarsdale. And my last one that I'm going to ask you is just ask Elvis, Jackie Robinson,
Shabbos Goy.
Shabbos Goy. We have a
Wait,
great
read the
list.
rest of the list, read the
Colin
rest of the list.
Powell, Martin Scorsese, and Harry S. Truman.
Mic drop.
Great job. So we're going to open it up to audience questions. I do want to take the prerogative. Normally at the end of our live shows, we give people the opportunity to wish a mazel tov, which you're welcome to do tonight. But I did want to wish a mazel tov. My Bubby and Zadie are here, and today is their 64th wedding anniversary.
Mazel tov.
So it's a big day.
Yay.
I love you.
We love
And
you,
some of
Bobby
you
and
might
Sadie.
remember Bubby from the episode in which we hang up Stephanie's mezuzah. She was our rabbinic authority.
Wait, why did we have to call her?
Supervisor.
What did we have to call her? Because we were taking down a
Right.
We didn't know if we had to make
We
a new
need to
bracha.
do that bracha for
My
them.
Zadie is the rabbi, but, my Bubby knows quite well. He's always.
And really, the question should be about anything you want. It could be about the podcast or the book, or about BB or
Occupied
Bobka
Scarsdale.
or anything else you want.
Regular Scarsdale. Hi.
Hello.
Will you tell us your name before everyone, and then tell us the question?
So my name is Sabrina McMillan, the most Jewish name in the entire world. My fiance and I are aspiring podcasters. We're both mixed race and Jewish, and we're starting a show called Not That White about mixed race experiences. And I just wanted to say quickly, I've been studying the way that you guys sort of do your questions and answers to try and get a sense of how to interview people, because we've never done this before. Something I've been thinking about with the podcast is how daunting it can be knowing that there are so many other podcasts that kind of cover the same subject matter, but obviously everyone's different. Before I was listening to Unorthodox, I started listening to Judaism Unbound, and I know that you guys are like the biggest, most popular Jewish podcast, but I was wondering if you guys have any relationship with other Jewish podcasts, or what it's like as more and more podcasts are coming onto the landscape.
So
I'm sorry, before we even answer this, I have to tell you a story. So the other day, we're sitting at a staff meeting as we were about to go on another podcast, Jesuitical, which is the podcast that the Jesuits, listening to Unorthodox, kind of with our permission and our boundless love and encouragement, produced to kind of have their version of Unorthodox. And Stephanie's telling everyone we're about to go on the show and talk to three very nice Catholics who, by the way, drink as they record, which is such an improvement over what we do.
that's the difference between their show.
Right.
They don't interrupt each other and they drink.
Right. And then Stephanie says, "Oh, I'm about to go on my favorite podcast." I was like, "Your favorite podcast isn't your podcast?" She's like, "They don't interrupt each other." They're so polite.
So I think, first of all, I think the more Jewish podcasts there are, the better.
Amen.
I think when we started, there were not as many like good, not throwing shade. There weren't well-produced shows. There were definitely a lot of shows. I mean, Vox Tablet had a podcast for like 10 years before we started. And Tablet actually also produces Israel Story, which Ira Glass has called The Israeli This American Life, which is an amazing show with stories from Israel. And then we also have a third podcast, which is called Parsha in Progress. And I have an interview up today on the show with Abby Pogrebin, who hosts that. So like, the more the merrier. I think that also, it's like rising tides, what is it? Lift all podcasts. So I'm happy that there are other Jewish podcasts. I really like the Kveller podcast.
The Branch.
Oh, I like The Branch, yeah. The Branch is Hadassah's podcast, also stories from Israel. I'll be moderating an event with the host of that show, Dina I keep calling her Dina Branch, Dina Kraft. I think it's December 17th, the day before St. Louis, if anyone's around, here at the Hadassah headquarters. But anyway, I think that it's great to have more Jewish shows. I also like, is it called Call Your Mother? Jordana Horan Gordon's Call Your Mother. I like that. It's a show about parenthood. I'm not a mom, but I enjoy it. But so the other advice, I mean, look, I think in this oversaturated space, specificity really helps, right? Like, we are a very niche podcast. We have a lot of listeners because like we are so targeted that actually you find what you want. And so I think that whatever can make your show be a little different, and the good news is there are so many other podcasts in that same arena because people are interested in them, right? There wouldn't be a lot of shows like that if people weren't already interested. So you know that there's an audience out there.
Right. The more specific you are, we find the more universal the appeal of the show is. And I think the key here really is to be, absolutely unabashedly unafraid to just talk about the things that you feel really passionate about. The only mistake really you could make here is try to kind of see what other people may want to do and kind of try to like do that dance to hit targets that you think are right. Our show very much reflects our passions, the passions of our listeners and our engagement with these traditions and our endless curiosity. And I think when we sit down to talk to people, we don't try to produce like, good, shticky kind of audio that'll be cool or something. Like there's an actual engagement here. I'll give you an example of what I consider good radio and bad radio just to upset and annoy and offend people here. But I wrote a profile not long ago of Howard Stern. And I contrast his interview with Stephen Colbert with Terry Gross's interview of Stephen Colbert. I am really sorry. I absolutely despise Terry Gross and think she's one of the absolute worst interviewers there are because she sits in her little booth up behind the curtain in the Land of Oz and she asks these very clever questions that make her guests do all these kind of dances. Stephen walks into Howard Stern's studio and Howard Stern looks at him and like a human being gives him a hug and then starts talking to him about his family and his brothers and growing up and faith and things that got so real and so emotional. We're not here to perform. We're really here to try and connect.
I will say that's
To be like Howard.
maybe the most Liel take, that Terry Gross is overrated.
Oh,
Like, what?
hugely overrated. Terry Gross is the bagel of public radio. It's a food stuff. It's a thing that just needs to end already.
Next question.
Hi, I'm Amy Handelsman, and I've studied Talmud and Torah with Liel. He's a wonderful scholar. So my question is, did people fight over the entries, like, no, I want to do Mahjong or whatever, and how you chose who would write what? And I think there's a consistency of tone and humor, and you guys are funny, so did one of you kind of do a humor rewrite for the entries?
So that's a great question. So it's obviously the three of us who edited and created the book, but we had about, I would say, 40 contributors. And some of them are in this room tonight. And we basically said, okay, who is the person who could write about movies? And what are like the 5 movies that make it in? Or who is our food expert? And what are the 5 foods that are going to get their own entry? Of course, there's a whole page on deli. There's, an entry on appetizing. But like, what foods make it in? And so we sort of outsourced those decisions to people who really knew what they were talking about. We had someone, write about Jews in sports. We had someone write about Jews in pop music. We really sort of tried to find experts in a lot of different areas, because we can acknowledge that we don't know everything. We know like most of the things combined, but no. So then it was a question of who wants what entries. We had a spreadsheet, a very insane Google Doc that all of Tablet staff had access to, and they could sort of pick what they wanted. And sometimes they would get assigned things. And I would say Liel probably wrote about 70% of this book. Mark wrote a lot of it too, and I wrote it, and then we all edited it together. So I think the tone is different from entry to entry, right? Because some entries are serious and historical or religious, and we're not going to make fun of Shmini Atzeret. We're going to tell you what it is because no one knows. But like we would sort of between the three of us would sort of smooth everything out. And so also once it was in layout, if you turn to a page and it was like so insanely heavy, we would try and fix it a little bit. Maybe there's something we would add. Maybe there's a way we could spice it up a little.
And again, we wanted the humor to be. Do you mind opening to my favorite?
Oh,
entry
yeah.
Without spoiling what it is. We wanted the tone to be humorous because we figured it was a great way to engage. But at the same time, we also wanted things that would actually kind of make you think and make interesting juxtapositions and kind of alert you to religious, theological, and historical things like the following. Stop me if you've heard this one before. The ambitious and narcissistic son of a rich man shocks the world by somehow ascending to power, mainly by colluding with a large empire. But he's still a real estate guy at heart, so he spends most of his energy building huge structures that are very, very fancy. A lot of people are saying he lives an exorbitantly flashy lifestyle and is hated by pretty much everybody. We're talking, of course, about Herod, the puppet king the Romans installed in 40 BCE to govern Judea. We owe him Masada, the port in Caesarea, and most important, the Second Temple. So we really kind of wanted to find different ways into topics that otherwise you may not really care that much about.
That was a hot Herod take.
Paul and Nicole have flown in from London for your show today. On the question of universality, what chance of you guys coming over to London and doing a tour of Europe, please?
We would love that. It's funny, people assume that places we're not going are because we don't want to go there. Someone sent me an email that says, I saw your tour schedule. We're in Atlanta. What are we, chopped liver? And I was like, no one invited us to Atlanta. So basically the answer is yes. We would love to go to Europe. We'd love to go.
The exception, of course, of one specific country.
We can't go to Belgium. But Liel has like this weird hatred for the country of Belgium.
If you haven't listened to the show, go listen.
I don't understand it, but it's become
Belgium,
like
the child rape capital of the world.
I don't
I'm
think.
contractually obligated to say it.
That's very. I feel like it's not whatever.
verified.
Anyway, so yeah, we would love to do that because again, we want to meet more of these communities, and I think the London Jewish community is really interesting and going through a lot, and so we'd like to be there.
We have had Chief Lord Rabbi
Yes.
Sachs. So London has come to us.
The world's second most popular Jewish podcaster.
Yeah.
It was awkward when we
Although I
interviewed
will say
him.
that if your election go a certain way, God forbid, foo, we'll come to fight, man. We're not just doing shows. We're doing like Krav Maga training sessions and stuff like that.
Yes. Hi, I'm Judy Banky, Susan's mom.
Your
Hello.
daughter emailed us about you. We heard you're amazing.
My daughter is a friend of yours. This question is not a trap, but I'm asking because I'm trying to see how intergenerational your references are. So I'm very happy you have a reference to Barbara Streisand in the New Jewish Encyclopedia, or the Newish. Do you have a reference to Hedy Lamarr?
Oh,
Not
do
only
we have a
do we have a
reference?
response for
Barash.
Hedy Lamarr, we have. Hold on.
We're obsessive with that particular topic.
Hold on. I'm going to this page.
Yeah. Oh, you should go to that page.
H-E.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Oh my God, I'm in the H's.
This is why we
What's
love our
wrong? Oh, wait.
audience.
Yeah, there's a. Look here, a massive photo
only
of
dedicated
Hedy
a whole
Lamarr,
page of the
who
book.
Not only was this actress in Bombshell, she invented Wi-Fi. Can we talk about that? She invented Wi-Fi, and Gal Gadot on page whatever, it turns out is actually playing Hedy Lamarr in a miniseries that's coming to Showtime. So we are like on team Hedy Lamarr, badass Jewish women. Yes.
Hey, my name's
like your
Christina.
hat.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you because I'm one of the people that found your podcast during the conversion process. So there's a lot that you can read in studying to become a Jew, but it's really hard to kind of understand the jokes and the cultural aspects. So I want to say thank you because I feel like I get it as much as I can get it, and I found that through your podcast. My question is for Liel. Do you have any plans to do a Daf Yomi podcast with the new cycle starting in January?
Oh my God. So first of all, thank you.
Will you
and
explain what Daf Yomi is?
I absolutely will. And you should know really that nothing makes me, and I think I speak with Stephanie and Mark too, happier than hearing stories like this, because I can't imagine a greater honor than being part of someone's journey and someone coming into this tradition that I love so much. So thank you for this.
I like to think that we add that like je ne sais quoi.
Je
That
ne
like
sais
that
quoi?
ineffable quality that you don't get in a class.
Yeah, again, by interrupting each other constantly.
So-
So the Daf Yomi, as I think most people here know, it's a tradition
no one
of.
knows that.
Who here knows what Daf Yomi is? All
Who
right.
here has never heard that phrase before?
So Stu and Ari from Yeshiva University are here after the show. Go see them. They would they would take care of that. It's a tradition that started a while back in which people read one page of the Talmud a day, study it. It takes approximately 7.5 years to complete the whole cycle. And the siyum, or finishing of the whole cycle, is happening in Giant Stadium in January. I think at New Year's Eve it is. It is my absolute dream to do a kind of podcast / column / something in which I do nothing in my life except for read Talmud and talk about it. I do it in my own personal life. I really don't know how physically I will sustain this. I don't know what my wife will think about this. There are a lot of logistical questions here, but I think that this is a great opportunity. Even if you've never heard about this thing before and you just hear it now for the first time, just know that the cycle ends in January, and it's a great opportunity to just pick up any copy, any version, and or Ilana Korshan's amazing book about having done this journey herself, and just read and engage with it, because it truly is one of these books that terrifies people because it has this weird, typographical order, and it's, half of it is in Aramaic, and there are all this commentary, and it looks strange. It's an astonishing book, and such a pleasure, like a real joy to read. So get at it.
And we are going to have an upcoming segment on Daf Yomi.
Oh yes, with Adam Kirsch.
Hi, my name is Ada, and I'm sorry I have not actually heard the podcast, but I really look forward to it. So about 2 years ago, one of my best friends called me up, and she said, guess what, I'm Jewish. It turns out, and she really wasn't before that, turns out her mother did 23andMe. She did DNA testing and discovered that she was Jewish. And I'm wondering if this is a topic. I mean, this is something that's happening all the time now. People discovering that actually their genealogy is very different than they thought it was. So I'm wondering if this is a topic that you have covered or plan to cover. We had actually thought about doing a podcast called New Jew, like NU Jew, for all her questions that she had about what it means now that she's Jewish. And one of the questions was, what about the jokes? Can I tell them now? And I said, no, not yet. But
There
anyway,
is
just
an
wondering
entry
if
for new and you in the encyclopedia.
It is something, we did an interview with Dani Shapiro, who has an amazing book, a memoir called Inheritance. Read it with my book club. Shout out to Kayla back there. She basically takes a DNA test and has this result that she's not expecting, and essentially her biological father wasn't who she thought he was, or wasn't the man who raised her, and it's a whole, complex and emotional story, and then her biological father isn't Jewish, and she sort of goes through what it means. It's a really fascinating book. Ultimately, it doesn't mean anything, right? Because she is Jewish, she feels Jewish. Read the book. But yeah, I mean, it's something we're talking about. We actually all did DNA tests at one point, and we were going to do a show about it, and then it sort of never happened. I think there is a really interesting, DNA show to be done.
Mine just said Jew.
Mine did say 97.1% Ashkenazi Jew.
And we also met this amazing man who walked with us in the Salute to Israel parade, who had recently
yeah.
discovered that he was Jewish. Where was he?
So that was
Dominic.
Dominic. He's from Poland, and it's a sort of a similar thing happening there, where it's not DNA tests necessarily, some of it is, but people who are discovering Jewish heritage on their parents' and grandparents' sort of hidden histories, and that it comes out later in life. A grandparent will tell you, actually, I was Jewish, or something like that. So a lot of young Poles are having a similar experience. There is a lot to be done on that topic.
And
We're
very
definitely interested.
frequently, on a sort of somewhat related note, very frequently we will run into trouble when we have on our show the Jew of the Week and the Gentile of the Week. And we'll welcome the Gentile of the Week, and we'll say, our Gentile of the Week is Swami Baba, the spiritual leader of this and this community. And he would look at us and say, do you know I was born Irwin Goldstein in the Bronx, right? And we're like, we keep failing again and again. The whole world we know is Jewish.
Or the guy who was like, halfway through the interview, he's like, by the way, my mom's mom, towards the end of her life did tell me she's Jewish, so I think that makes me half. And I was like, dude, you are all in at this point.
Hi, my name is Ariel. I'm a fourth-year rabbinical student at Hebrew Union College, not too far from here. Thank you for sort of entertaining me on my ride to school every Thursday morning. One of the things that we talk about in school all the time is how to speak to the Jews as a whole when our world and our country is so polarized, and people are so struggling with the political climate in America and in Israel. And you guys, I think, do a great job of speaking to the Jews in such a polarized time. And I'm just wondering what kind of advice you might have for people like me or anybody here who is looking to reach the Jewish population and try and not alienate Jews.
So,
Thank you.
I have strong opinions on this. Surprise. Here's a really simple solution. Absolutely no one cares about your politics. You may think you're very righteous. You may think you're completely correct. But if the sum of things that you think Judaism ought to care about could be seen on MSNBC or Fox News, you're doing it completely wrong. This is not a platform for some kind of major political action or get out the vote or awareness. I'm not saying that these things don't matter, but I see so much of organized Jewish life being completely subverted by these huge political currents, and so much of the energy going to prove, well, Judaism says X, Y, Z, and therefore we should support immigrants. Well, Judaism also says this and this and that other, and therefore we should support Israel. Drop all of it. None of it matters. All of it is toxic. There are 1,001 other places where you could go to do 1,001 other things to feed your soul and your conscience politically, socially, ethically. Judaism offers us an incredible array of very diverse paths to figure out who we are, what is our relationship to God, if any, and what do we need to do in the very short time that we got on this planet. And I think part of the thing that makes the show special is because we really sidestep, and we do it not because it's some sort of clever strategy, but really because emotionally we can't imagine getting stuck in that mire, right? We sidestep all these issues that so many of us waste so much time talking about, and instead just wonder how we could find new ways to connect with each other, to actually kind of take on community again and rejoice in the fact, who cares if you think different things politically than me? Who cares if you're engaged in XYZ? As long as you're here and excited to be with other Jews, as long as you're here and excited to learn something new about Judaism and something new about Jewish life, that's a great start. Just simple pride and joy. I don't think there's a better recipe.
I will respectfully disagree with most of what my respected co-host said. I mean, I do think that I'm actually quite moved by a lot of particularly young Jews who are finding other, social and environmental elements to their Judaism. That to me is important, because they're not going to synagogue necessarily. So we have to figure out, it's great that someone's doing something, right? And people are finding very modern, in some ways not at all modern, but new expressions of their Judaism. And I support that. I mean, I think in terms of talking to people, we hopefully are not condescending. We are not patronizing. We are here talking about Judaism because we care about it, and I think it comes through. And I think we're talking to anyone who is interested in, the past, present, and future of Jewish life. And so, to me, the idea is you've put this podcast on. You are here for this conversation. You are invested in some way, even if you're not Jewish, even if your friend is Jewish, your spouse is Jewish, your partner is Jewish, or you're just curious, or you went to Hebrew school but can't remember a single thing, but know that this is important to you, or you want to sort of supplement your Jewish identity. I mean, I'm just grateful that people are listening. And I think that so much of Jewish institutional life is like being lectured at from a podium by someone who assumes that they know everything and you know nothing. So we don't assume we know everything. That's, again, why we had all of these contributors be part of this book, because we are aware of the ways in which we are not, infallible.
And again, that everything is a crisis. The crisis of anti-Semitism, the crisis of intermarriage.
That's tomorrow night.
Right. It's one of my favorites. Rabbi Teleshkin told us on the podcast a few weeks ago, but one of my favorite Lubavitcher Rebbe stories. By the way, one of the points of contention in this book was that I wanted all 7 Lubavitcher Rebbes included, and I only got 2. But I chose wisely, I think. And she's the first and the last, which is kind of classic. It's completion. And so one of the favorite stories is, a guy goes to see the Rebbe and says, Rebbe, I just don't know what to do. My son, he doesn't want to be Jewish anymore. And the Rebbe says, well, tell me more. It's like, well, I don't understand why he would feel this way, because every morning I tell him, you have to pray Shacharis because it's so hard to be a Jew. And in the afternoon I tell him, well, you have to do this and this because it's very difficult to be a Jew. And in the evening I tell him, you must do so and so because it's really, really, really hard to be a Jew. And the Rebbe looks at him like, well, I really wonder why he doesn't want to be a Jew. And I think the more you could do to sort of connect to these energies, the better. And really, that ought to be the source of our effort. Because if continuity, which is this word that is battered around, means that everyone sort of sulks along guiltily to shul simply because they don't want to upset their parents, then frankly, I don't care for it. Like, I think people should just go and marry whoever they want and eat whatever they want and not worry about it. We need to find a way to make them really feel the passion and the joy and the love. And you know what? Often it starts with the dumbest thing. It starts with like a cool song that you heard, and just as the soundscape of your youth. It starts with an image of your grandmother lighting candles and just that warmth and the joy that it brings you. And then a simple story from the Bible that gives you like this piece of wisdom. That's the foundation. So I think just lay that down and just don't worry about all the sophisticated stuff.
Okay, I'm told 2 more questions.
And then we stick around and could talk all night long. Hey, Amy.
Amy Friedman.
Hi.
Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Amy Friedman. I'm from Forest Hills, New York. My favorite entry in the book is indigestion. And Liel and his wife gave a toast at my wedding. So obviously, I'm not a stranger to the podcast or the book. I love the book, and it's so exhaustive and fabulous. But my question was, you had mentioned this before, people are coming up to you and saying you left out X, Y, and Z. So what, if anything, other than the other Lubavitch Rebbes, what has resonated and you said, oh yeah, I wish we had included that?
it's funny. So the first events we were doing, the Q&As were literally just people asking, saying a name and me saying yes or no, is it in the book? But now the nice thing is now people buy the book and come to the event and actually know, but I'm still happy to answer those questions. But, one of the things, that I've heard at 2 different events, so we have an entry, we have like a Semites entry. So we have Hindus, which are people who are both Indian and Jewish. We have pizza bagels, which are people who are, this is a self-identified thing, like people who are half Jewish, half Italian. And someone came up to me, and this is not like that at all, but someone's like, so do you have Jubins in there? And I was like, those are Jewish Cubans, and that is a very vibrant and distinct community. And so I said, no, Jubins are not in there. I was like, pizza bagels are. And they were like, well, I don't care that pizza bagels are in there. So basically, that to me is something that's a great example. I mean, it's obviously not integral to it's not like the Mishnah, whatever that is, just kidding. That's page 241. But, there are things there are sort of communities that everyone deserves a mention, but that's for the next version. And I have to say, our publisher is very keen on the idea and told us from the beginning, like the idea that there would be not reprints, but like updates is exciting to them.
So here's one thing I want to do in the update. It's not so much an omission, but it's an addition. So the subtitle of this book is From Abraham to Zabar's, which, by the way, what a pleasure not having to explain that joke here, because in Cincinnati, they're like, what's that?
It's an eatery, an appetizing shop.
And here's a dirty little secret. The last entry in the book is not Zabar's. It's Zyklon B. And we thought that putting that on the cover was kind of a bad marketing move. But I think now we've come up with a solution. I think the new entry that will seal this book, also the last word of this book is Hitler, just saying.
Because I think you say the gas used, blah, 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 and also a terrible entry to end a Jewish book.
Period.
Damn
Hitler.
you,
Period.
Hitler.
Yeah. And so I think in the new edition, the last entry will be ZZ Top, band that kind of looks like Hasidic Jews, just so we could have them.
All right, final question.
All right, hi, everyone. My name is Monica Sass, and I want to thank you all because Unorthodox is the only piece of media that everyone in my family regularly consumes and enjoys. And also, I want to echo a mazel tov from the podcast last week. I'm the proud sister of Rabbi Paula Rose, oft shouted out on the podcast,
Paula Rose
and proud
is
aunt
everywhere.
of Adina Rivka.
Wow.
Amazing.
Mazel tov.
Everywhere we go, someone knows Rabbi Paula Rose.
That's true. I'm from Cleveland. My dad gave a shout out on the podcast once. So yes, really,
Paula Rose is
really
America's
everywhere.
rabbi.
Yeah.
Yes. But I do also have a question about the book. On page 19,
Oh.
are we all actually related? And with the very thorough descriptions of how all of these people are related, my friend Jacob and I were wondering to what extent that's true and fact-checked and reliable.
Oh,
Like,
so this
is this real?
This goes with the entry for Ashkenazi Jews. Basically, it's called Are We Actually All Related? And A.J. Jacobs, who has been on our show and who has sort of become an amateur genealogist.
A great
because
rabbi.
He found every member of his extended family in a book called something.
Yeah.
It's All Relative. And thank you. And he and his brother-in-law, this is fully fact. I mean, the book is fact-checked. I basically said, give me like 10 funny people and find out how they're related. So he basically says, Karl Marx Baruch Spinoza is Karl Marx's second cousin, twice removed, wife's uncle's fourth cousin. And there's some database where you can plug everyone in, but actually, Karl Marx is Lauren Bacall's husband's, ex-wife's husband's, aunt's, great-great-uncle's fourth cousin once removed. Also on this page is Freud
Shimon Peres.
and Maggie Gyllenhaal. But here's the best one.
Who's Shimon Peres' third wife?
No. What?
No? Just trying out here.
It's Shimon Peres' second cousin is Lauren Bacall. That's an actual thing. They are like very closely related. So that's your takeaway of the evening. It's not his third wife. It's his second cousin. Oh, one more.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah.
Hi.
I'm interested in the history/background of Tablet Magazine. I've always thought that it was very politically conservative and quite from Orthodox, whatever. Can you tell me something about the history background of the
Yeah, so
magazine?
Tablet is where we work. It's just celebrated its 10th birthday last year, so it's been around a little bit, a lot for an internet publication, but I would say it's aggressively heterodox in its mission. that we will publish something that makes you mad one day, no matter who you are, is sort of what we do, with the idea being that Jewish discourse, Jewish writing should open your mind up to new perspectives. So that is sort of the broad overarching thing. We don't have a political bent. I would say each piece stands for itself and no piece represents the magazine. That said, people will say, you know, there are things on the same day, someone will have these like very funny, very different complaints about a story, but the idea is we publish everything. I mean, not everything, right? But we publish a variety across a good cross-section of opinions, I would say.
And look, so much, I agree completely with what Stephanie says. I think if you look at our masthead and read our stories regularly, you will indeed find stories that are conservative. You'll find stories that are very liberal in their bent. You'll find stories that are more kind of rooted in religious observance, some that are not at all. I think one of the tragedies of this current era, kind of precipitated by the internet, is the fact that we have gotten very used to using the sort of like your political, ideological stance as a kind of prism through which to look at everything, and we have all these echo chambers that we could just go and amplify our rage and our dislike. And I think Tablet is in every way really old-fashioned. In that it believes that a great magazine, like a great community, like a great dinner party, is an invitation for all sorts of people to come and have conversations. And some of them are weird, and some of them are incredibly upsetting, and some of them are really reaffirming. But really the only value that they all share is just curiosity. If you're interested in this thing, if you're interested in Jewish life, if, again, you don't want to make Jewish life the handmaiden of a particular ideological or religious belief, we're the publication for you. And honestly, I don't think there's any greater cause right now in the world than to make sure Judaism stays as open and heterodox.
Ooh.
Thank you so much. We're gonna be selling books and have a book signing. Hanukkah is coming up, so you can buy more than one. And thank you so much for coming.
We're here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah.
Yay, Sarah.
Ben Eater.